Yeah, first, about this time last week, we got a really nice surprise. Kansas Magazine came out with their newest edition, the Skies and Space edition. And inside it features the Geneseo Museum and the things that we're doing there in the UFO capital of Kansas. Uh, Museum is housed in Doc Janzen's house. This is was his residence, uh, and he collected a lot of UFO information. And actually, he and his friends were the kind of people that they didn't really refer to them as UFOs because they knew what they were. They were spacecraft from other planets. So they generally referred to them as spacecraft, and the aliens that they interacted with. So the museum was closed down for a few years, was in kind of a bad state, and about to probably be closed for good when the city decided to reorganize a new board and see what we could do to save things. And it's a museum of Geneseo history. Doc Janzen had a wide interest in a lot of things, so we have quite a collection. But the UFO, the spacecraft and alien collection was the thing that really had intrigued me since I was a kid. And it was, I have to tell you, it was like Geneseo's big secret. It was something that the town knew Doc had, but they were kind of ashamed of the whole thing. They thought Doc was a crackpot, and so no one ever talked about this collection. It was Geneseo's secret. So I felt like if we were going to make the museum successful, we needed to go public with the collection that he had. And in the process, we decided that we should be recognized as the UFO capital of Kansas, because actually nobody else was doing that. And we're right in the middle of the state. If you're wondering where Geneseo is, we are, well, if you put your finger in the middle of a map of Kansas, you're going to be very close to Geneseo. We are northwest of Hutchinson, about 45 miles. We are west of McPherson, about the same distance. Southwest of Salina, about the same distance. So you kind of get an idea of where we are. Lyons, Kansas is south of us, about 18 miles. Ellsworth, Kansas is about 20 miles north of us. So that's where Geneseo is. So we became the UFO capital of Kansas, even though most of the folks in Geneseo didn't really understand why we were doing it. But it caught on, and through the Rice County Economic Development, they had a mural program going on, and they came up with, they did this. We didn't do it in Geneseo. They came up with the Geneseo's reputation as a UFO capital, and they produced this mural for Geneseo. And that's an old lumberyard building along Main Street. You see the water tower in the background, and I don't know if they do it here, but the vultures in our part of the state fly in and land on the water tower in the evenings, and that railing will be completely lined with vultures overlooking our mural. I think it's kind of neat. So, so this is Dr. Elmer D. Janzen. He never married. He was literally a genius in that he had so many degrees. He was a chiropractor, he was a minister, he was a doctor of naprapathy, he read Braille, he taught Braille, he had his own little Braille typewriter where he could reproduce things in Braille. He ventriloquist, an auctioneer. We had a gal from Iowa come in and noticed his certificate for becoming an auctioneer, and it was from a company that she used to work for there in central Iowa. So Doc had a lot of connections. He was a graduate of the Moody Bible Institute, and like his ventriloquist dummies were all, Moody is out of Chicago, and his ventriloquist dummies that he would use in his ministry were all made in Chicago. Well, the first, everyone talks about Roswell and the crash in 1947, and that maybe, I guess that would have been the event that pushed the flying saucers and little green men into the consciousness of America. But we had an earlier sighting out around or in Oregon, in which oh dang it, I'm trying to Kenneth Arnold. I'd forgotten his name there off the top of my head. Kenneth Arnold was a commercial pilot. We'll go back here. Okay, Kenneth Arnold was a commercial pilot who was flying one day in early 1947, before the crash of Roswell, when he saw these flying discs and reported them. They looked a little more like what you see here, but newspaper accounts, even though he called them flying discs, began to call them flying saucers, and he eventually relented and referred to them as flying saucers himself. But those were that was actually seen before the reports of the crash at Roswell. All of this stuff is most definitely being recognized by Doc Janzen and people across the United States. He was living in this home, actually with his parents. They had bought the house in 1951 and moved in from the farm north of Geneseo. Let's see. Well, 1951, yes. We'll go on to the next one. That will give more explanation. So, in the collection that Doc has, this is the first book that Doc was very, good about recording everything that he did. He went around the town of Geneseo, taking photos of the town of his time, and also then he was collecting photographs from family albums of the families in Geneseo and some of the surrounding communities as well. Turned them all into slides so that we have a slide program. We have a slide collection of over 8,000 slides of just the history of Geneseo and its surrounding area and its families. And he documented every slide. I don't know when he slept. He documented every slide with an identifying number and a description of each slide. And he did the same thing with everything else that he collected in the museum. There's a number that goes with it and a description of the item. So the books that he had in his collection were noted on the inside when he first received, either purchased that book or someone gave him a gift of a book. And this one was in 1955. So we take it that he's really developing his interest in the flying saucers about 1955. Perhaps, probably developed a bit of an interest before he actually got the books, but that's when he begins. This particular one, The Secret of the Saucers, has extensive underlining and great detail in it. And so these things are forming his knowledge of the flying saucer community and those that are involved in it. One of those guys that was involved in it was a fellow by the name of Buck Nelson out of Mountain View, Missouri. Now, Buck was an enigmatic character. Yeah, he appeared to be just a simple farmer, but he had an interesting background. He had been a world traveler and had given slide programs to local churches and the like about his travels at one time. Sadly, those slide programs have disappeared. But this is Buck. And in 1955, he was picked up. I'll go back to exactly how this developed. On his farm north of Mountain View, a spaceship landed, a flying saucer landed on his place, and when he stepped outside, he was suffering from what he called rheumatism, and as they approached him, they zapped him with a beam of light, knocked him to the ground, and when he got up, the rheumatism was gone. And there were people in town that would verify that this guy did have this medical condition and it suddenly had disappeared. Well, so he interacted with these folks they claim to be from Venus, over several landings. And why they were landing on his place, he explained, was that the spring water on his place was the water was something that they preferred, and so they would stop and collect his water. And then one day they offered to take him onto their ship and take him into space. And so this is a rendition of the flying saucer that Buck Nelson took on his initial ride with what he called the Space Brothers from Venus. And he eventually wrote a little booklet called My Trip to Mars, the Moon, and Venus. And he explained that, even though he was well-traveled, but he was a simple man, and he'd not highly educated. I think he said not even into the upper grades. At one of the interviews that he had with some scientists over his experience with the spaceship, they asked him, well, what kind of propulsion unit did they have? How did it work? And he said, I don't know. They only showed me, I'm not well educated, they only showed me what I could understand. And the one thing that he understood was that the ship was propelled by magnetic force. And beyond that, he didn't know how it worked, but that was his experience. Well, he later on began to develop a little, well, what he did was, there were flying saucer clubs in those days. This collection, I guess I should have said right away, but this collection is like a little snapshot of the UFO world of the 1950s and 1960s, and a little bit into the 1970s. And it was a simpler world than we live in today. So Buck started putting on spacecraft. Well, first Buck went to flying saucer clubs around the country. He spoke in Chicago, he spoke in Kansas City, he even spoke in Washington, D.C. And from that notoriety, he came up with the idea of having a spacecraft convention on his farm. And so he began in 1958 with this spacecraft convention, and people came in, I don't know, I think the first or second convention brought in over 1,000 people. And there are photographs from some of those early conventions, and it's like, if you're my age, it's like looking at your grandparents' day or your childhood, you know, and the way people dressed and the way people took care of themselves. And if you remember the little roadside parks, because there were no fast food places, so people brought their sack lunches, their basket lunches with them. And there was a gal that put up a stand on his place that made fried chicken and hamburgers for people to buy during the convention. But and so not having, a lot of them not having even money for motels, we're just camping out there under the shade of his trees. And he brought in speakers from around the country. So we know that Dr. Janzen and a friend of his by the name of John Dean were there for at least the second convention in 1959, because John Dean wrote a book in which he credits the photograph to Dr. Janzen and dates it 1959 at Buck Nelson's spacecraft convention. One of the things that they, well, let me go on here. John Dean, okay, where are we? There. That's an early picture of John Dean. John Dean was a mechanical arts teacher out of Nickerson, Kansas, just 20 miles away from Geneseo. And he used to give, well, because of Doc Janzen's experience with making slides from photographs, he and Dean got together and produced a slide program that he would go around the state giving programs on what he would build them as programs on outer space. And he happened to talk to the folks at my high school. I suppose Doc Janzen promoted him to come to the PTA meeting and give a program on outer space. Well, sure, that sounds really interesting. We're talking about 1963, maybe, when we're trying to get to the, into space and all that thing, all that sort of thing is getting started. And actually, it was a little earlier than that, early 60s anyway. And so my parents took me and my sister and baby brother to the PTA program to learn about outer space. And here stood John Dean up on the stage with all of these slides, and he's talking about aliens, and he's talking about flying saucers, and he's talking about worlds that you'd never even heard of before, and the teachers were wholly embarrassed by the entire thing, and the parents in the audience just, I think that was the beginning of the idea that Doc Janzen was a crackpot, bringing this guy to the Geneseo school, perverting science in front of our children's eyes, and he went on and on and on. People were not probably because they couldn't believe what he was saying, but they also were just worn out, and people were getting up and leaving. And actually, my family left before he was done because us kids were falling asleep. But he presented, these are some of the drawings that John Dean came up with from the descriptions that Buck Nelson gave of the flying saucer. And it gives a little floor plan of the inside of the saucer and the makeup of that in general. So he took that program to the spacecraft convention early on, and this is a picture of John Dean standing on the stand at the spacecraft convention. That spacecraft convention only lasted up until 1966, and it really dwindled out. And you know how things change and interests change, and fewer and fewer people were coming, and actually Buck's health was beginning to fade at that time. But Dr. Janzen was able to get a lot of John Dean's work and placed it in his house. So his parents, his father was the last to pass away in 1964, and after his parents were gone, he opened his house to the public as a museum, and all of these different things, not just the UFO stuff, but everything that he had was just plastered on the walls. It was like wallpaper with photographs and different things. But this particular room is our UFO room, made up of mostly John Dean's collection and some of the stuff, the newspaper accounts that Doc had come up with for the area. I like to tell people, and I know it's true. I've been around this stuff. We started in 2018 to bring this museum back to life. I really only got a chance to start studying this stuff maybe within the next couple of years. So let's say 2020. So 4 years I've been trying to take in as much knowledge as I could from the collection. And I am pretty sure that it might take 30 years to really digest everything that's in this tiny room. We have more books from that era. John Dean, his book alone, the guy, another genius, his book alone is like an encyclopedia of alien culture. He's got alien alphabets. He's got alien ships from different planets that you've never heard of before. We had oh dang, I'm gonna forget. There was another friend of Buck Nelson's, and missing his name right now. He was visited also on his place by people supposedly from Venus. And I guess I need to tell you that the people that they are coming into contact with are not the little green men. They look just like you and me. They would give you maybe a little higher description, giving them Nordic looks. A lot of them were well-built, masculine-looking fellows, and I think that whole Nordic idea was popular in those days. But so they were interacting with people that they could identify with, that they called the Space Brothers, and the Space Brothers actually had a culture among their solar brethren that was real similar to Christianity. They had instead of a 10 commandments, a 12 commandments was basically a couple of extras added on to the one that we have. So these guys were Christian oriented. Doc Janzen, being a minister, a friend of his ran a Bible camp near Tulsa. So they were oriented in that direction anyway, and really identified with the Space Brothers. So the fellow that I can't remember his name right now, when he was visited, they brought with them a dog that had puppies. And they didn't want to take her back on board the ship for some reason because of her delicate health situation. And so they left her and the puppies with him and told him that they would return and pick them all up, except that for him taking care of them, he could keep one of the puppies, which he did, and he named Queenie. Let's see, I might have later on in the program, but I don't know if this will work. I'm not pointing it out anyway. Down in the corner, in a little glass box, is a picture of Queenie and a tuft of her hair. And he would go around to the spacecraft conventions and the flying saucer clubs and peddle her hair. So we have hair from a dog from Venus in our collection. And actually we have two tufts of hair because she had a pup later on that they named King, and we've got a picture of King and hair from King as well. So there you go. It's just such a unique and fun collection. So this is John Dean. Again, I told you the religious, the Christian connection. John Dean's first book that he wrote was Flying Saucers in the Scriptures. And then the one that's just encyclopedic is Flying Saucers Close Up. And this is on the front of the book that says, Spacemen urge the author to compile this book, supplied much of the information and approved the work. Now, John Dean never did admit or say that he had personal contact with the Space Brothers as some of the others did, but claimed that he got all of his information through telepathy. And telepathy was another form that was being used by these guys in those early days. There were, Buck Nelson had a friend in the Ozarks that lived 40 miles away, and neither one of them had a telephone, and yet they claimed they communicated by telepathy, and when they needed to meet with each other, they just knew where to go to meet because they're telepathically communicating. So, I don't know. That's what they said. So you've heard a lot of stories about UFOs that are cigar shaped, And it would appear that at least some of those cigar shapes, if they're very large, like this one would be, I think it was 2,000 feet long. If they're very large, they're probably motherships that would come from the particular planet. This one is a Venetian mothership, and I'll try to use that. I'm not very good with this thing. See if we can do it again. Not really. I don't see how. Anyway, let me just step over. So, the regular flying saucers that everyone thinks of are really tiny in comparison to this mothership. That works good. Yeah. There we go. And so it actually carries the flying saucers that we all think of, and it's on the deck, on the hangar deck. You see these little black spots? Those are individual saucers that are being carried by the mothership. The flying saucer would come in to this chute, go through airlocks, and then be transported down to this deck, and then stored as it shows. Then when they were ready to launch one, they bring them out and they're transported down to this lower deck, go through airlocks, and then they exit the mothership from beneath. Just like that, I not being well versed in all this stuff when I began, I think it was a year before I realized what this was telling me. I just wasn't getting it. And yet it's pretty simply explained. It's just that I wasn't thinking on the right level to understand what was happening here. But that. Now, that was another piece that was drawn by John Dean, and actually originally came from a fellow by the name of George Adamski or Adamski. We also have in our collection audio of these guys talking at various conventions or just recordings of meetings that they had together, and they refer to him as George Adamski. This is one of the Venetians that was supposedly living in Washington, D.C. I think they said he had an office in the Pentagon at one time, or something along those lines. And there are stories that this particular guy, dang it, Thorpe, he's supposed to be still around. And this picture was supposedly taken in the mid-1950s, maybe late 50s. He's supposedly still around and looks exactly the same. He's never aged, according to the stories. I've never found any photographs other than this one of him to verify his existence even. But here's a pic. That's King, and a little tuft of hair that goes with King. It's under glass, so you get a little reflection there. We've got the hair. So we decided, along with our declaring ourselves Kansas, the UFO Capital of Kansas, that we should start a celebration and to bring attention to the museum. And it just happened in 2022 that World UFO Day was going to be on a Saturday. July 2nd it's always on July 2nd. And so we had the opportunity to celebrate World UFO Day. Well, along with being a UFO Capital of Kansas, we started calling. Geneseo has always had a relationship with just the letter G, and kids used to, just for fun, used to say that they were from G-hole. Where I'm from G-hole. And but we came up with a Dimension G, because when you come into the city limits of Geneseo, you're really moving into another world. So we held the first World UFO Day celebration that we know of in Kansas, that July 2nd of 2022, and we had about 350 people show up, something along those lines, and the thing is, no one else in the state was doing it. It was really a niche that we needed. Geneseo is one of those towns. It's one of those prairie towns that's just crumbling. The buildings are, empty. They're collapsing. We have no downtown business anymore. Highway 4 runs across the north side of town. We have a nice little convenience store there that actually was closed for a while. We were really in sad shape while it was closed. So Geneseo needed something to keep it alive and keep it growing, and World UFO Day was our answer. Well, now we're going to get into this. If this other stuff wasn't strange, we're going to get into something really strange. 2 days after our museum board decided to do the World UFO Day, I raised cattle. I don't know if you could tell that, but and I was going out I live in town. I was going out to take care of some cattle, and a couple blocks from the museum, I went around the corner and I come past and I see the secretary is there working in the museum. And I thought, well, I'll stop, see what she's doing. And she was busy. She's a great cleaner, and we need that. I don't know, that dust just seems to collect within hours, it seems like sometimes. But she's working away, and she says to me, have you seen the strange carving, I don't remember her words, etching out in the curb? And I said, no. So she took me out to show me, and this is what she showed me. I took a picture of it. That maybe this was the original picture, and I sent it off to some people that I thought might know. What do you think this is? And everybody came back with, well, it looks like a compass. And that little vector, well, originally, let's see, yeah. So that vector is pointing what they thought would be northeast. Well, I had taken a picture from a different angle, and when I switched around so that the compass was pointing north the way it should, then the little vector was pointing to the southeast. And once I had it turned that direction, I thought, that just doesn't look like a normal vector, and you blow it up, it's a flying saucer. It's a flying saucer. When was this thing made? Our curb and gutter was put in, we finally found out just this year, because one of the fellows was a high school senior when they poured the gutter. 1947 is when they poured that gutter, and that flying saucer No one knows where it came from, how it got there. So I've been to Roswell in 2018, kind of because I knew we were going to try to promote our UFO collection. I wish I'd have put it in. There were some folks in the parade there that dressed up like predators, and they wanted their picture taken with me, so I'm in the middle, so there's cowboys and aliens. It was great. But so I'd been to Roswell, and I thought, well, that's pointing southwest. So originally, we're thinking, okay, it's pointing southwest, and it actually is just catching the south side of the house that Dr. Janzen lived in. And the thing is, it was carved in that gutter 4 years before the Janzens owned the place, so he had nothing to do with it. And then I thought, I wonder how far Roswell is. I mean, not how far, but where is Roswell in relation to this? And I got out a map, and just as sure as a crow flies, as sure as an arrow flies, that Roswell, that compass is pointing directly to Roswell, New Mexico, exactly 500 miles away. And there's not even a community that it runs through, all the way from Geneseo to Roswell. It's a direct flight without any disturbance through another community. So we called it the Roswell Compass. And we got up a little sign there, you see, down below the sign, there's the compass, and it's pointing just towards the back of the house. And we have a nice little sign to describe. Now, the thing is, why is it there? No one can tell us. We don't know. We're waiting for somebody to give us an explanation. We did come up with a little T-shirt. Welcome to Dimension G, and it's got the Roswell Compass on it. So the second year that we did the UFO Day, we wanted to keep it on Saturday, so we couldn't do it July 2nd. That was going to be Sunday. So we decided to call our event the Kansas UFO Day, which is now, that's what it is, Kansas UFO Day, and we keep it on a Saturday. One of the things that we added the second year was this little backdrop with the flying saucer and the beam shooting down. And I didn't get, I might have a picture or two of a few people, but talk about popular. There were whole groups of 10 and 12 people and families and individuals all wanting to have a picture taken in front of that backdrop. And the thing is, it was so fun because people were coming away with the biggest smiles on their faces. That was maybe the best part of it all, how much enjoyment everyone was getting from this little idea that we had come up with for celebrating Doc Janzen's collection. We had decorated yards in town, and that's a little bit of the grounds. They're actually covered with a lot more tents this year. I don't think I got a later photograph, but we have several vendors that come in, and that particular tent that you see in the center there, that's we've kind of given a nod to Doc Janzen and his outdoor spacecraft convention. So we don't have room in the museum anyway to do programs, and there's really nothing in Geneseo that could take the place. So we just put up a tent and we have outdoor programs, different speakers that have information about UFOs. We have a parade, and one of our participants, these guys came to watch the parade, and we did not get their names. I don't know how we missed that, but they were just cool in the difference. That's actually my grandson. He's got a painted up forehead. Had a guy come in with a homemade flying saucer. And this this kid's father wrapped their uh, four-wheeler up in aluminum foil, made a nice little display. And that, you just got to know Marvin. He's a little bit off the wall to start with. So. And you see that building in the background, that's what eventually had the mural painted on it. At this time, the mural wasn't on there yet. That's our parade from a year ago. We even got the attention of the Ellsworth newspaper with this little cartoon, whether UFOs are real or not. I thought that was fun. So, 1951, that's when Dr. Janzen moved into that house with his parents. 1951 is the year that they put out the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. I'm sure you've all seen it or heard of it. And Klaatu comes to Earth to warn us that our violence was, going to be our undoing, and his protector Gort is there beside him. Well, we decided that we needed to have a life-size Gort on the grounds. So we got some fellows that are metal artists to work on the project, and there we go. He's 8 foot tall, and he stands just beyond the Roswell compass. If you see there in the background, there's Klaatu, and he's more, Gort is three-dimensional. Klaatu is a sheet metal, and his face is cut out so you can stand behind him and you can be Klaatu for the photograph. So there you can see Gort in the background from the Roswell compass. And to kind of hopefully help pay for things, we even came up with a flying saucer donation box that sits there on the grounds too. And all of this is 24/7. People can drive up, any time they want to interact with Gort and ponder the reason for the Roswell compass. So. We wanted to draw attention to the famous quote, Klaatu Barada Nikto, and in my mind, everyone wonders, well, what did that really mean? And when it comes right down to it, if Gort had not been stopped, he was going to destroy planet Earth. So in my opinion, Klaatu Barada Nikto means to save planet Earth. And I think we all need to keep that in mind every day, that this Earth is something that we need to protect and preserve and save from destruction. Another thing that we're really, this was a spaceship's welcome. This was something that John Dean actually came up with, and it's in the window of the museum. And the lettering below is a language from the Space Brothers. John Dean was from Nickerson. He also taught school in the Hutchinson School District. And so they claimed that there were people from Venus that were living in Hutchinson at the time, and they were actually hoping to make contact with more of them. So they would drive around with these cards in the back of their window, in the back window of their car, trying to draw attention that they might contact more people. more of the Space Brothers. Never did hear that they actually made any extra contact that way. But what they did do was they stopped doing this because they then, as time went on, they began to realize that there were aliens that maybe weren't as friendly as the first ones that they come into contact with. And so they began to be pretty pretty leery of the contact because they weren't certain whose side everyone was on. This is a picture of Dave Zerfus. Zerfus helped me. He's a musician, and with those recordings that were all on reel-to-reel tape, he's helped us to put a lot of them on CD. And so we have quite a collection of, like I say, different speakers from the time period and that sort of thing. And yeah, Dave has been extremely helpful, and it's so interesting. He like I say, he used to be an old rock and roller, went out to California for a while to try to make it back in the days when everything was going hot in California. But then he and his wife had a child, decided they didn't want to raise their son in that kind of atmosphere, and they moved back to Manhattan, Kansas, and he started singing cowboy songs. And his first album cover, that's what he put out. Is that something? That's almost as much as the Roswell compass. He ends up getting, and he's been a great supporter of the Geneseo Museum, and he's a speaker every year at our get-together. So just another picture of the backdrop. I don't know if you might recognize some of these folks. They came and put on a wonderful, absolutely wonderful panel for us at the program. We're all standing there in front of Gort. And hey, Enzo. You don't recognize anybody on there, do you? And they were a big hit. I'll tell you what, we had a great time with them. There's another picture of the collection and some of the works. I don't know if I made enough of an emphasis on the number one reason that they were making contact. Now, why they were making contact with the particular individuals that they did, I don't really know. But they had a message that we needed to stop our nuclear testing because it was throwing the polarity of the Earth out of position, and not only the Earth but the entire solar system was being threatened by this polarity change. And that was maybe more important to them, to the Space Brothers, than it was to us, because it had to do with the way that they traveled with their magnetic propulsion. If you threw the polarity out, it's going to affect the propulsion units, and it may have been that was responsible for the crash at Roswell. Again, Buck Nelson was told the same thing, and we have this photograph that was collected by Dr. Janzen, in which the Space Brothers claimed that they could reduce the amount of radiation danger from a nuclear explosion by firing a green fireball into the cloud. And this is supposedly an image that upper portion, you see that streak across the top, that was one of these fireballs reducing the radiation within the cloud, supposedly. That's what they were doing. Now, so it's so very interesting that these guys in the 1950s understood the concept of magnetic propulsion. If you, I don't know what I did with that pointer. Oh, here it is. Okay, if you look at this particular piece, what you see here is a magnetic pole running all the way down through the center of the saucer. And these poles could actually be changed positive to negative from one end to the other according to the way that you wanted to move the machine. So, as it turns out, I'm going to step into a world I don't know a whole lot about, but I've been trying to understand. Mike Fiorentino, has anyone ever heard of this? I happened to hear an interview of him on the radio. So I got a hold of this book, Masters of Reality, and began to study it. And I tell you what, I don't know anything about this stuff. Very much a novice. Physics, yeah, I don't know. But I've read this thing twice, and some of the regions of the book I've read 3 and 4 times over, trying to grasp what he's talking about. But basically very basically, what he's talking about is that the classical physics that Einstein developed his theory of special relativity from were diverted away from when we got into quantum mechanics. And he says we made a mistake by switching to quantum mechanics and not staying with the classical physics because of one thing, and that was that modern science today says that space is empty, that there's nothing there. Prior to quantum mechanics, we were saying through classical physics that space was a quasi-elastic medium, that it was a semi-solid, that it is a semi-solid, that Einstein knew was there, but he couldn't understand it himself. So by accepting that there is something in space that we can't see, but is there, a physical property, it gives us the opportunity to use this magnetism to move through space. We wouldn't be able to do that if space were empty. Okay. It goes way beyond my real understanding of this whole thing, but he has described, okay, so in 1964, after Einstein, he said if Einstein would have known this, he would have probably been able to have understood his mistake and gone back. They discovered that within protons and neutrons and the smaller particles are what they call quarks, not something we can see. But these quarks are very important to the whole creation in that, okay, inside those elements are three three of these quarks, and two of them will be positive and one of them will be negative. And you've heard of a perpetual motion machine, perpetual energy machine. We already have it. We have it inside of we have it in every cell, every particle of our body is a perpetual motion machine. These quarks never slow down. They move at just under the speed of light, and they require no energy to make them do that. And we know they're there. We just don't know how they work. But he says that this is the very reason that everything has mass. Without the movement of the quarks, there would be emptiness. There would be no mass. You need the movement to create mass. And in doing so, you come up with the ability to move things through this quasi-solid space, because as you move through with magnetic energy, you can stretch that space or you can contract that space with the mechanical use of high-powered magnets. So if you go back, I guess I'd have to go back. The one thing that's not showing, they show the big magnetic pole, but they don't show the source of power. And he says that it would take like the energy of a nuclear reactor to give you enough magnetic power to make this thing work. So what you probably have to have is a very, very, very small unit that could produce that kind of energy, and that's beyond our technology at this time. So I guess I'm leading up to a point that, you know, how there are some people who say that because of the crash at Roswell, we have had the ability to reverse engineer and make our own flying saucers, and that we have flying saucers, the federal government does, but they just don't want to tell us. I don't believe they do, because I don't believe they've been able to figure out that one last important step, and that is that energy source, how to make that work. So I guess I've led you on a really long trip that went from the 1950s to possibly far in the future yet. But this is the kind of stuff that we're investigating and just having fun with out of the UFO Capital of Kansas, Dimension G. So come see us. Oh, you know, I should mention, you might notice I'm a bit of a dreamer, but so Geneseo is this town that is crumbling, collapsing, and yet it's already becoming, within just a few years, we're being noticed and we're becoming a destination. We're getting this kind of coverage, and I don't know how. I wish I did know how to run a UFO bar and grill. But if somebody that has that kind of background would love to come to an exciting little town and build a destination bar and grill, Geneseo is the place to do it. With that, I think I'll let you folks have a little rest before we go on to the panel. And I thank you.